right. So this is kind of like a new production that I'm just working on. And I've been kind of on this whole kick of really just wanting to make Michael Jackson inspired like beats, right? So it kind of started with this, where I started off with a bunch of chords, right? So I played these chords out, right? And then what I did is that so now that I knew the maximum amount of chord notes that I would play, or the maximum amount of notes that I would play per chord was around 5. So I split up around 5 MIDI tracks and copy pasted everything. But then with each MIDI track, I would only highlight specific notes within that chord. And so every chord cluster has different notes highlighted. And then what I did is that, this is getting a little meta, but then I sent those MIDI notes out through USB into my Moog Sub 37. And then I just kind of let it like loop like 5 times over through these chord progressions. And then I was messing with my filter knobs and all that to make these like really interesting singular like melody notes or melody lines. And so it kind of sounds like this. Let me know if you hear it.
Yes, we hear it.
Great. Right? So we have that. This is the second one. Third. Fourth. Right? So these super like, it just sounds like one like note at a time. But then when you hear it together as a cluster, it sounds like this.
Wow.
So essentially this is what most analog synthesizers do, is that you have an oscillator, which is like literally just, it's a really fancy word for like, for like a note, like a digital note. And so because the Moog is really essentially, there's a couple oscillators I work, but I'm essentially working with one note at a time because it's a mono synth. Now, if I take 5 of those notes together in a cluster and I re-record it over and over again, then I can like cluster them into an actual chord itself. And so now I have a really expensive sounding synthesizer, right? So this is what this is, right? So you can, for the price of, one Moog Sub 37, right? You can get the sound of a $8,000 synthesizer, the Moog 1, right? Just if you have the time and the knowledge to do it, right? So now you see the filter, I'm playing with the filters where it's kind of like really rising, falling and all that, right? So anyways, that inspired this whole other, like this whole jam, right? Where now I'm like kind of building on top, which sounds like this. Like to me, like this is very Quincy Jones, off the wall era Michael. It's like my favorite era of MJ, right? I'm always like chasing that style of production and those like the chords, right? Like the way that Greg Fillingane's pieced that rhythm section together and the chordal structures that he put on this stuff. I'm like, man, like that to me, like that's the genius of this era.
Yeah,
it's like it's so musical. It's like the verses, there's pre-chorus changes, the choruses sound different, the rhythms shift up. It's like it was such a musical journey, like from start to ending, like that there are loops at play, but those loops are really progressing, they're rising, they're falling. And so I've always loved that era. So I'm like trying to recreate that. Now the part, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to interject. So you took MIDI chords and you muted, like let's say of a chord with 4 notes.
Yeah.
Say, you muted 3 of the 4 notes and you kept the 1. And you built a stack of MIDI notes, and then you sent the output of that MIDI into your Moog and re-recorded it back into your DAW as analog. And therefore, that's why we're looking at waveforms rather than MIDI bars.
Yes. So to put it another way, you see like, here, let me just open it up, right? Put it another way, right? You have this.
Yeah.
All I'm doing here is that I'm like copying it multiple times. So now I have like, say it's like 4 stacks. Then what I'm doing is that for this stack, I'm going to mute all of like the bottoms, right? Say like, so now like the only notes that I play at are the ones on the top. For the second one, I'm going to mute all of the top and just leave you know, the second cluster of notes, right? So now when you look at, oh, hold on, sorry. So now when you look at it, you know, the first cluster is this, the second cluster is that, and so far and so forth. You can do that with all the others of them. So literally, I'm just kind of mechanically doing it that way and creating stacks and clusters. And then when you feed it back through the audio, you have stuff like, you have these notes.
Right.
Now this is what they look like, depending on the cluster.